If black goes here, then we can play queen d3, threatening h7. But then, of course, black can always play queen g6, right? Hey guys, this is Andy from Noctie, and today we're gonna go through the weekly scenario for week 45 of 2025. This week, we pay tribute to Daniel Naroditsky, who tragically passed away on October 19th, 2025. No words can fully capture the impact Daniel had on the chess community. He'll be forever remembered as a leading figure in popularizing modern chess. Not only was he a top player, he was also an educator and an ambassador of the game, inspiring millions of people all around the world. May you rest in peace, Daniel. This week, our position comes from a game played by Daniel Naroditsky against Isan Suarez in the 2019 US Masters Championship. In multiple occasions, Daniel has referred to this game as being his best game. We jump into the game at move 22. Black has just played g5 and now it's Daniel's turn to move. So let's just take a quick look at the position and try to understand what's going on. First, we'll take a look at the material balance. And we notice here that both sides have their queen and both rooks left on the board. And both sides have 3 minor pieces, with black holding the bishop pair. So in that sense, black should have a small dynamic advantage with the bishop pair. And then we move on to the pawn structure. We see that both sides have 7 pawns, and each had their own majority. White, of course, has more space on the queen side, with these 3 pawns already on a3, b4, and c5. So here, technically, we have a pawn majority against black's 2 pawns on the queen side. But on the other hand, black has more space in the center and on the king side. So this is a very interesting position, with both sides having their own assets as well as their own weaknesses. So what's going on here? And if we take a look at this and try to figure out white's plan, I think it's a good idea to start looking at black's position and try to figure out which piece or which pieces are the most important, holding together their entire position. And here we notice, of course, that after black plays g5, it's a very double-edged move. For one part, it is grabbing space on the king side, but also it weakens the light squares near black's king. So that definitely has to be taken into consideration. And furthermore, we see that black's e6 square here is weak. Currently, it is defended by the bishop, but it's only protected once. And this e6 pawn is very important. It guards the d5 pawn, as well as protects the important f5 square. So here, what do you think Daniel played? It's an excellent moment to pause the video and try to figure that out yourself. A quick reminder, it's not an easy move at all, and you have to really think outside of the box. Think that material isn't so important here, it's rather about squares. So now that you had some thought, perhaps you considered the brilliant exchange sacrifice rook takes e6. This is what happened in the game. Daniel realized that the e6 pawn is weak, and by taking the pawn with the rook, we sacrifice an exchange, but in return we get a bishop and a pawn. So already, material-wise, we're technically speaking only sacrificing 1 point. But more importantly, of course, with the e6 pawn gone and the light squared bishop gone, black now has immense problems in his position. So for one part, the d5 pawn is weak, but also all those light squares in black's camp will be difficult to defend now with the light squared bishop gone. And another interesting thing, of course, is that if we check with the engine, this sacrifice is actually also the engine's top choice. So not only was it a very practical and intuitive move to make for Daniel, but also it is objectively speaking the best move in the position. So let's see what happens here. Here, black plays a6, basically waiting in the position and perhaps stopping white from playing b5, gaining even more space on the queen side. And here Daniel plays another brilliant move, because remember, we have sacrificed an exchange and we need to create some active threats. If we just stand by and do nothing, black will simply have time to consolidate their position. And here we have another beautiful move, bishop b1. So these backward moves are sometimes quite unintuitive, moving a piece backwards instead of forwards. But this move has a clear plan. The bishop here on d3 isn't really doing anything. Sure, it eyes down this diagonal, but they aren't really any entry points. So instead, Daniel swings the bishop back to b1 and soon to a2, where it will apply even more pressure on the d5 pawn. So here, black makes a reasonable move, rook c6, offering an exchange of rooks. And that is very principled. Of course, when you are ahead in material and also when you're under pressure, it is always a good idea to swap off some pieces. And here is another crazy moment of the game. Feel free to pause the video and try to figure out what Daniel played here. So now you've had a thought, and here is actually the most critical point of the game and also the most beautiful part. So remember, Daniel has already sacrificed an exchange to get the superior positional advantage. But now it seems that white's initiative is slipping away. Black is activating their rook, offering a rook exchange. So how should white react? And here Daniel found the brilliant idea of sacrificing a second exchange. So let's just step back for a moment and see what's going on here. Remember, we should look in black's camp and try to pinpoint which piece or which pieces that are the most useful. So in this sense, it's not really the material count that's important, but rather the role of the pieces. And here we see that it's the black knight that is really the important defensive player. Here, the knight of course controls all those important light squares. And as we mentioned, white's plan is targeting those weak light squares. So Daniel thought here, why not sacrifice another exchange? Now white will simply have a monopoly of all those white squares, and black has simply lost their best defender. So black captures back, and now it's white's turn to move. So now white is down 2 exchanges in turn for 1 pawn. But here white can simply grab the d5 pawn with tempo, gaining back some material. And also we have this dangerous connected pass pawn on the d file that's ready to push forward. Black goes to e6 with the queen, very logical move, pinning down white's knight. And here Daniel moves it away from the pin while also creating a threat here against h7. So by using tactics, we manage to get away with this pin while creating another threat. Of course, black must respond to this, so black simply drops the king back in the corner on h8. Now the rook on f7 is protecting the h7 pawn. And here, Daniel simply retreats the knight back to e3. And see here, we are ready to push d5. In fact, we are threatening d5 with a winning fork. So black must immediately respond to that. And furthermore, the knight here on e3 is ready to jump into f5 or perhaps g4, and also controlling these 2 light squares on the queen side. So here, black moves back the rook to c8, and white can simply push forward the d pawn with tempo. So even though white has sacrificed 2 exchanges, look how smoothly all of white's pieces are coordinating together, and it's very difficult for black to play. While on the contrary, all white's moves are very natural, and with each move basically white can create a new threat. So now black must move the queen, and here we simply push forwards. So now we have this beautiful pawn chain of 4 pawns from a3 all the way into d6. And these pawns are on the dark square, so our bishop, which is a light squared bishop, can work together with these pawns to control so many squares. And here, black decided it's too much, the position is too difficult, so they sacrifice back some material. But that is no worry to us, we simply take back, and now we have 3 minus for 2 rooks. And that is a very interesting imbalance that occurs quite seldom. So purely material-wise, they are roughly equal, but in practice, the 3 minor pieces will often be able to dominate the 2 rooks, and especially in this case, where there are so many weak light squares in black's camp. So black give a check, and white can simply move up the king, and now black decides to sacrifice the material back to try have a chance in the endgame. So here black sacrifices the exchange, and when white takes back, we have a position where white has 2 knights for 1 rook. Generally speaking, 2 minors usually dominate a lone rook. The side holding the rook will need to have multiple pawns as well as passed pawns in order for the rook to be able to win. But here, in addition to the knights and the rooks on the board, of course the queens are still on the board, and a rule of thumb is that queens and knights are great combos because they together can create many devastating threats. So here, let's just look for a few more moves to see how Daniel used brilliant technique to convert this endgame. So the queen takes the pawn, and now we have equal pawns, but white has 2 knights for 1 rook. We simply jump into the f5 square, hitting the queen moves, and now in with the queen. So already we are creating some threats on the back rank because we have this beautiful knight here on f5. So black plays h5, creating some space for the king, and now white simply jumps in with the other knight. Look how beautifully those 2 knights are working together. They are both protecting each other and controlling many key squares in black's camp. Black's queen is under fire, so they move it, and now Daniel jumps in with the knight to h6. So with all these pawn moves that black has made in front of the king, sure, they have gained space on the king's side, but the flip side is that there are many weak squares near the king, and white now beautifully utilizes that. The rook goes back, and now in with the other knight. Look how slowly but steadily the knights are moving forward, and all the time they are protecting each other. So here after knight f5, white threatens to place the queen here on the 7th rank, creating devastating threats here. So black plays queen e6, stopping that, but now the queen has a new target. We play queen f3, a beautiful fork, and this just demonstrates the power of the queen when it can attack 2 different weaknesses at once. So we of course target the b7 pawn, but more importantly the h5 pawn. So here black decides to save the h5 pawn since it's more important, and now white can grab the pawn here on b7. So now white is a pawn up, and it's clear that black is simply lost. So here black played another move, queen g6, but after queen e7, black simply resigned. And the reason is that we are threatening the rook here on f8, and if it moves, we can jump in with the knight and create some nasty threats against black's king, with checkmate to follow, or that black needs to give up serious material. So now it's our turn to play against Noctie, and let's see if we can manage to take inspiration from Daniel's game and win the position against Noctie. Now it's our turn to play against Noctie. I'll follow the game and take inspiration from Daniel's brilliant exchange sacrifice. So yeah, here we get the chance to use it ourselves and see if we can manage to win this against a human-like opponent. So alright, let's go for it. Rook takes e6. Of course, black is forced to take back, and now we play rook takes e6. And here it's going to be interesting to see how Noctie responds. In the game, Daniel's opponent played a6, and here we actually have a deviation right away. So instead of going for the game continuation a6, Noctie plays queen d7. On the surface, that looks completely logical because the queen is hitting our rook, forcing us to do something. So here, my initial thought is to consider rook d6. Of course, the rook is protected on that square, but more importantly, we will be hitting the queen, and then we'll be able to pick up the d pawn. So yeah, I think I'm going to go with that. Happy to get a blue move, so that is a great move. So Noctie seems to agree with the idea. Okay, queen goes back to e8, and here I think we should just take the pawn. And after we take the pawn, actually material count is equal. We would have 2 pawns in compensation for the exchange sacrifice. So let's do that. In addition to that, we will also have managed to swap off black's knight. Remember, in the analysis, black's knight played a key role in controlling the light squares. So here the bishop is of course attacking our rook, so let's take with the rook. Okay, Noctie plays rook e7, doubling up on the e file. So first, I'm just gonna pause for a moment and see if it actually threatens anything. So we notice here that our knight is controlling e1, our bishop controls e2, our pawn controls e3, and e4 is also occupied, as well as e5. So really, there aren't any entry points for the black rook. So I don't think we have to be afraid of anything. So with that settled, instead we can turn to creating our own threats. Yeah, so here I have a few different ideas. One of them, of course, is to try for a similar idea as from the game. For example, bishop b1 with the intention of going queen c2 and targeting this diagonal. But let's say we play bishop b1. If black goes here, then we can play queen d3, threatening h7. But then, of course, black can always play queen g6, right? So I don't think we should go all in with that idea, since it can easily be defended. And that is a general tip as well. So don't focus too much on a threat that the opponent can easily defend. The risk is that, of course, that it becomes too much on hope. You hope that your opponent misses the threat, but oftentimes they'll see it and easily defend it, and all your planning will go to waste. So here, what if we play bishop f5 instead, hitting the black rook? And if black goes to d8, we are happy to swap it off and then push d5. So I think after bishop f5, the rook might have to go somewhere else. Let's say to c6. But on c6, then we can push b5. So bishop f5, hitting the rook, rook goes to b8. Okay. And in that case, I think we can just push the b pawn, right? Let's try with that. Okay, we got a dubious move, so we missed a better approach. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and do a take back because this is a very critical position. So I'm going to challenge myself and try to find the best move. So bishop f5 is not correct. But now we know that, and that's simply because we can't really make progress. And now our rook is really stuck here. We'd really like to push the d pawn forwards. What should we do? Is the idea to push b5 right away? Let's try and analyze that. Let's say we play b5. And let's just imagine if black doesn't do anything, if we get to move again. Can we create any threats? We could play b6. But then really I don't feel we're creating anything. This is actually tricky. This is getting tricky. Or should we play a flexible move like bishop c2? Let's see. Nope. Once again, it wasn't the correct idea. Let's see what Noctie does. Alright, but here I'm going to use a take back once more. I really can't find the correct way forward. So I think I'm going to use a hint button. So what it does is it will show candidate moves for us to consider. And yeah, those are moves that a strong human player would most likely consider. And amongst them, usually the best move will be one of them. Okay, so here are 3 moves and none of them were among our choices. So let's see and analyze these candidate moves one by one. G4, I like that very much. It cements the f5 square, so then it will be firmly in our control. And then of course we have rook f5. It looks a bit strange, but now when I think about it, it makes sense because it's on a light square, so there is no way for black to attack it. That's one good point. And the other is, of course, it leaves the d file ready for the pawn to march down. And then queen c3, of course, we are preparing some potential ideas here along the long diagonal, and perhaps followed up by rook f5. Yeah, so here I'm going to go ahead with rook f5. I like that move very much. And a quick reminder, when you play against Noctie, feel free to use a hint or take back anytime. So it's a great way to practice and really force yourself to think about the position. Okay, Noctie plays h6. That is marked as a blunder. Why is that? I think it's just a useless move, right? It doesn't really do anything. And now we get the chance to push a d-pawn. So let's do that. So that is a very natural move. And on the next move, of course, we can push it further to d6. Well, let's do it. And we get it with tempo, even better. Black gives a check. Wow. Okay, so black sacrifices an exchange. And I think, yeah, the rook really didn't have many good squares. So yeah, rook e6 or rook d7, the rook would have been squeezed anyways. We would have, knight d4, for example. So here the question is, should we take the exchange? If we don't take it, of course, we want to play knight d4 and use the knight somehow. But on the other hand, yeah, it's a full exchange. Let's just take it and play the position from here. So now with that exchange, we have equal piece balance again. We have 2 extra pawns. Okay, Noctie makes another sacrifice, and this is actually in the same style as from the game. Noctie gives up the bishop for 2 pawns to eliminate our dangerous pass d pawn. But now with this exchange, we are simply up a piece. Up a piece for nothing. Isn't that great? So what should we do here? Here I am thinking of playing queen c4, threatening to enter the 7th rank. Noctie goes back with the queen, and now I'm thinking of relocating the bishop. Either relocating the bishop or putting the queen here along this diagonal. Okay, so here Noctie is hitting our queen, and we could play queen e4, exchanging queens. So I feel like this, of course, shouldn't be the top choice for the engine, since we have so many threats against black's king. There must be a way to launch a decisive attack. But on the other hand, swapping off queens will lead us to an endgame where we have an extra bishop. Let's say black goes for this move, we play here, and I feel that's a good way of eliminating any risk. So perhaps we'll just get a risk-free endgame. But let's say we don't play that move. Let's say we play, for example, queen b3. And after that, the threat is to play bishop a2, threatening this diagonal. Black perhaps moves back, and then we can disturb black. So here, difficult choice. But you know what? Here I'm going to actually go for a boring queen exchange. And I think Noctie will not like this move. But yeah, from a practical standpoint, I feel it's still an okay move, because a whole bishop up in the rook endgame should be easily winning. And in fact, yeah, Noctie marked this as a mistake. And to be fair, I kind of agree, because, yeah, there was probably more decisive ways to win. But now we got ourselves an extra bishop in this endgame. And a quick comment also, bishops and rooks, they work very well together. So they are both long-range pieces, and together they can work to both attack targets and support our own pawns. And here, let's just drop back the bishop, stay on the long diagonal, controlling many squares, and also supporting our pawn majority forwards. Okay, so here let's play rook d5, offering to trade rooks. And of course, if black does that, then the resulting endgame will be very simple. We'll have a whole bishop up, in addition to an extra pawn. That will eliminate black's remaining counterplay. Right, black does that, and here it will be easily winning. But really, from the position earlier, there's no way black can create any counterattacks anymore. So here, let's just promote a pawn and finish this game off. And now, on the next move, we'll have checkmate. Alright, nice, we did it. So this week's scenario was a tribute to Naroditsky, and we got the chance to play in his shoes against Isan Suarez. And we started the game at move 22 by making the brilliant exchange sacrifice rook takes e6. So we sacrificed the exchange and got full control over the light squares, as well as the weak pawn on d5 that we later could win and create a connected passed pawn. So yeah, even though we didn't get the chance to sacrifice the second exchange, since Noctie chose a different approach, still there were many elements that were similar to the original game. In the end, black felt too much pressure from the position and decided to give back some material. But by then, the position was already lost, and we managed to convert an endgame with an extra bishop. So that concludes our weekly scenario for this week. Rest in peace, Daniel. And as always, thank you so much for watching and happy playing. Bye bye.